Welcome to Spilling the Tea for Career Success. I am Kate Pozesnik of Quirk Personal Branding and Career Consulting, and I am thrilled about today's session with Victoria Roche. We are going to be navigating neurodiversity in the workplace and discussing how you can leverage your ADHD superpowers to thrive in your career. One of the reasons that this event has been such a highlight for me in preparing for is because I personally have ADHD. I was not diagnosed with it until I was 32 or 33. I'm a little bit older than that now, so it's been several years, but it explains so many different things that I had wondered why I behaved a certain way. And we're going to talk a little bit about what some of those things are, but for me, it's being easily distracted. Difficulty managing my time and being on time is probably one of my biggest Achilles heel. Staying on task is very difficult for me. And one of the telltale signs that probably wasn't recognized as when I was a younger girl, but that is indicative sometimes of ADHD, is I was always reprimanded for talking too much, talking out of turn, talking too loud as a kid. And this is something that's followed me through life. And I am well aware I'm a loud talker, but some of these things I started to understand some of the symptoms when I was diagnosed with ADHD. So today, our expert is Victoria Roche, and I'm going to have her introduce herself and give you a little bit more insights around what makes her so special today. But I want to give you some insight about what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to focus on what it is or how ADHD impacts daily work life and your long-term career development, particularly in the cases for women. But this session is going to be great for anyone who's listening in, because this is obviously something that affects men and women. Our topics that we're going to cover today include the common ADHD symptoms, such as distractibility and time management difficulties, and how you can leverage ADHD traits as professional strengths, not weaknesses. And we'll also talk about some practical tips and resources for your personal and career growth. We'll also talk about, if you do not have ADHD, you're still in the right place, because more than likely you are working with, for, or a senior position for someone who is neurodiverse, may have ADHD or another neurodiverse condition. And we'll talk about how you can better support those teammates and colleagues. So I'm excited. Victoria specializes in helping clients learn about how ADHD impacts their lives. She is an ADHD career coach and is intimately familiar with the trials and triumphs of ADHD because she personally has it herself. Now, she draws from over 20 years of experience of ADHD coaching and uses her ADHD coaching skills as a therapist to help clients create calm and productive lives and careers. So, Victoria, tell us a little bit more about your areas of expertise, and we will dive right into our conversation.
Sure. Just wanted to clarify that I'm no longer doing therapy. So just wanted to give you a little bit of background about where therapy fits in. So thank you. It's so great to be here, Kate. And I can tell you that, we both are accused of speaking too loud. So I don't think, sometimes maybe we don't need a microphone. But anyway, so my story is that I got my MSW way back when, and then did postgraduate training, and I'm a marriage and family therapist. And I worked at a private psychiatric hospital. And when I was working there, my daughter was actually diagnosed with ADHD. Also, I was put on, I worked on an adolescent unit in the psychiatric hospital. And basically the psychiatrist said to me, no one knows how to work with these ADHD families. So I'm going to give you Russell Barkley's clinical handbook, and I'd like you to work with these families. So that was the very beginning. So it was the realization that my daughter had ADHD, and then I was diagnosed, and that was in my 30s. And so I have a daughter and a son who were both diagnosed at that time. So what I did was I was actually doing therapy. I was also doing coaching at the same time for a couple of years. And then I decided to just go into coaching because I really believe there were a lot of therapists, but there were not enough ADHD coaches with my background. So I decided to do the coach training. And so I'm a life coach, I'm an ADHD coach, and I'm also a career services specialist. And I can thank Wilma Feldman. So she's someone in the field. I mean, she's probably the most recognized person in the field because she wrote a book. And that's going to be one of the resources that I'm going to share. But Wilma trained me. And I then, a couple of years back, trained some of the other ADHD coaches on how to do career coaching. So I've been in practice for 15 years on my own. I took some time off to rethink. So talk about career transition, to rethink whether or not I wanted to jump back into the field. And after COVID, I decided, yes, I want to get back into the field. And I am now working with a group rather than working solo. And I'm so happy I did this. So I'm working with the Center for Living Well with ADHD, a great group of coaches. So I'm doing that now. And so basically, I'm the person that's known for the career side of things. So I work on career development. I work on workplace issues and skills development. And so that's a lot of what I do. And I also do a mindfulness workshop as well, because mindfulness is a big part of my own practice. And with some of my clients who are interested, I actually help them and to learn about and also practice some mindfulness.
We're going to hear a little bit more about some opportunities and resources around mindfulness toward the end of our show. But one thing I wanted to just touch base on really quickly is how you became aware of your own ADHD diagnosis. And I've heard this story again and again, particularly of women who find out that they have ADHD because their child has it and is diagnosed. And because they start doing research around how to help their child, they start thinking, wait a second, this sounds familiar, or I deal with this. And then they go and get their own diagnosis, or may not necessarily get a formal diagnosis, but behave and treat those symptoms as if they do, which is still fantastic. Any way that you can cope with the symptoms of ADHD is going to be helpful. So I want to kick us off by asking you a question that I love to ask my guests. And it is, what's one thing that Google does not know about you?
One thing that Google does not know about me.
I know we're so transparent online these days. There's got to be something that we can't find out about you online.
So I guess I can point to one of my passions, and that is I just got into card making. I love making cards. I love receiving beautiful cards. That's one of my signature strengths, is the appreciation of beauty and excellence. And so I just love cards. And I love to paint as well. So I thought, I'm going to create some cards. It's old school, just handwriting cards and sending them out. And so that's one of mine. What about you?
Well, I have a question. So I have to know, is there like calligraphy involved? Is there collages? Is there paintwork? What is the medium that you're using to create your cards? I'm just curious.
Some watercolor, and some pen and ink, work. I do practice my letters. I find it very relaxing to practice. So yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I would have to say mine, it's actually one of them is ADHD related. I can't remember, I think it's just called a hyperfixation on foods. So, and this can be indicative of some folks that have ADHD as a symptom. I become fixated on eating certain foods and obsessed with eating that food for months on end, and then abruptly one day deciding I can't stand the sight of this food anymore, and I move on. So for example, when I was pregnant, it was watermelon and egg sandwiches. I ate them every single day. And then once I had my baby, I don't think I've had watermelon since, and it's been 11 years. most recently, my new obsession are these salad kit bags. It's called Sunflower Crisp. If you're wondering, they're delicious. And I will eat it nearly every day. And so my diet, admittedly, is not the best and most diverse, but this is sometimes symptomatic of people who have ADHD to fixate on a certain food, because I think for me, it's because my mind gets so overwhelmed that the thought of making one more decision about what I'm going to eat, something that's very arbitrary to me, is overwhelming. So I just go to something that is familiar, that I like, that makes me feel good.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's probably
It's
one of my-
easy. It's easy. Yeah.
And it's easy. So yeah, great question. I always like to learn a little bit more about my guests by asking that one. And you told us a little bit about how you became diagnosed. Will you tell us a little bit about your approach working with clients who have ADHD, and maybe a few techniques that you've used to help them overcome their unique challenges associated with the way that they function at work and in their personal lives?
Okay, sure. So, so I think, one of the things that we do is, when I first have a client, usually during the intake, there's an executive functioning skills inventory or assessment. And what we do during the intake is to go over those executive functions, and we go over, what are problems and what are actual strengths. So it gives me an opportunity to understand, the executive functioning piece. And some of the techniques that I actually use are, so in terms of the job, so let's talk about like job search. And you said job search and career development. In the job search, when people come to me about that, I I develop a structured approach. So I start out with, a job search plan. And we go through that together. So what really helps my clients is to have a lot of structure and to have a lot of support. So as we go over that job search plan, we talk it through, and also externalizing or being able to discuss it is something that's really helpful. So we may say, what are the target jobs? Let's come up with some jobs, some job titles. And sometimes they're like, I really don't know. And so we will brainstorm some of the titles, and then some of the, the industries.
Well,
So that
let's do something, because now I'm curious, and I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but for folks who have ADHD, do you see common themes of the types of jobs and or industries that they tend to operate most effectively or successfully in? Do you notice any one area or type of work that tends to be not easier, but more at home for people who struggle with ADHD symptoms?
Well, I happen to think that there's no such thing as an ADHD friendly job. I mean, so I think that, basically anybody needs to match what their strengths and their skills and their values, as well as their executive functioning challenges. So you want to kind of put all of that together.
Yeah.
So that's the first part of it. But there are certain industries and types of places that people go into where they really thrive.
Oh.
And so those places are like nursing, working in the ER, being an EMT, this kind of like exciting jobs. And now, so for people who maybe are hyperactive and really need to move around, those kinds of jobs. So it could be being an electrician. So it's like jobs where people are on their feet, they're using their hands. Those are a lot of the industries that I see that people thrive in.
That's so interesting. Okay. So let's talk about what people typically struggle with in the workplace. How important is it for people with ADHD to find the right work environment and culture that's a good fit for their needs or their executive functioning challenges?
That's a great question because I've been thinking a lot about the work environment and what's so important. And I think that having a work environment that is actually ADHD friendly is important. So from the very beginning of when I'm working with my clients on, coaching them on what environments are best suited for them and to know. And so it's an environment that where number one, there's support. So to have a supervisor or to have a mentor in the workplace that they could actually speak to, that they could actually communicate with, particularly when in the first 90 days to have to set up a meeting with their supervisor so that they could ask questions, they could get clear about what's expected of them. And then even ongoing to be able to have that kind of communication with the supervisor. And then so there's that supportive communication, but then there's also that environment. So like, the environment where you see, people are working in open, open communities, they're really distracting. So, they don't really, so for people who they work in cubicles, they don't have their own office. And so that's tough for a lot of people who find distraction is a problem. So a couple of the things that I recommend that people do are, one is when they are when they're working on something that takes a lot of thought, use your earbuds. Usually I suggest that they talk to their supervisor about that and say, this is what I'm going to do because I can pay attention a little better when I have the earbuds in when I'm working. That's one thing. A second thing is that a lot of my clients will go. So several of my clients work in hospitals and where in the units, everybody gets together and they have to do their notes. Well, people, if there is a quiet room that they could go to, whether it be in the hospital or maybe in a conference room that nobody's using, so that, they can get up from where they're working, get out of the distracted area and go into a room where it's really quiet. So those are some of the things, that I will usually recommend. Headphones, quiet space. Another suggestion that I make for people is, the office is really quiet. So let's say everybody gets to work at 8 o'clock in the morning. Have them, if they're early morning people, because some people aren't, but if they're early morning people, to come in before everybody gets there to get a jump start on what they need to do without a lot of the distractions, or if they have more energy at the end of the day to stay a little bit later. So those are just a couple of the accommodations that I would say.
Those are all really great suggestions because when I was working in corporate America, and it's been several years now, but I worked in an open office concept of probably 200 cubicles per floor. And it was very loud. Everyone was on different phone calls. There is no sound barriers. And I'm the type of person, I can't listen to music because a lot of people would do that. They'd put headphones in, and I didn't realize until later, this is embarrassing, that you can just buy noise canceling earbuds that are specifically made for that. And I've since used those and it's made a world of difference. But, having people come up and ask you for help. I've always been the type of person that I'm like open door policy, literally in a cubicle situation. But, people come up, talk to you, or you can hear them speaking on the phone, or there's an announcement being made, or whatever it is that's going on around you is very difficult. And oftentimes I would try to get a conference room, but that wasn't always possible.
Yeah.
So I followed one of your suggestions, which is I had a hard time getting, of course, I had a hard time getting to work on time, partly because when I was in corporate America, I had a small child. She had to go to childcare. It only opened so early. And the other part of it was because I struggled so much to pay attention during work hours that on the daily I would work late. And people are like, oh, Kate works so hard. She's so dedicated. I'm like, I was too embarrassed at that time to tell anyone that I just struggled to be productive. And
Right.
this brings me back to something I wanted to ask you about, which is I was afraid, and I've become a bit more cavalier and upfront now about my ADHD and some of the other things I've struggled with. I was afraid to tell my employer when I got my diagnosis. I was in a corporate job about a year in when I got my diagnosis, and I didn't even take medication at first, at least consistently. So I wasn't really coping with it very well, but I was terrified to tell my employer because I was afraid somehow it would be used against me, or that maybe if I asked for accommodations that they would say no. And I'm pretty sure I'm protected under a federal act with that. But so my question for you to follow up is, what would you say to people who are applying for jobs and or are already in a job where they have ADHD and they're afraid to tell their employer? What's your advice as a career coach who specializes in helping ADHD clients with dealing with that tricky situation?
Okay. So what I recommend is that when clients are going on job interviews, never disclose that you have ADHD. It doesn't make a difference. Basically, let's think about this. You're on the job interview, the employer wants to hire you for, there's a job description, they want to hire you for a particular job. If you can do the job, then you might be a candidate to actually get hired. So I would say that, whether you have ADHD or not, you really need to have the skills for that particular job. And so, so I discourage people from disclosing. So then you mentioned about being in the workplace. So what I do with my clients is that, we talk about, first of all, it's a decision that the client needs to make, because I've had some of my clients that come to me after they've already disclosed to the employer. And but if they haven't disclosed, then what we do is I usually will recommend that, why don't we work on some of the accommodations, because I'm familiar with what some of the accommodations are, but let's process and learn about what your needs are, and then we can think about some of the accommodations that would be beneficial to you. So, that is how I handle it. So, one accommodation that I mentioned before was asking your supervisor if you can, check in with them at the beginning of the week. And what do you talk about? You talk about, what are my goals? What are my priorities? Just checking in, even if it's for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
That's an accommodation. That can be an accommodation. And some of the things that I mentioned before about the conference room, some of those are accommodations. But so if you do disclose, what I recommend, if clients do want to disclose because they're really having a hard time and they're already on the job and they want to disclose, we do the homework together. So I give them research, I give them places to go. So one of the places that they could go it's called JAN, the Job Opportunities Network. And you can go to that if you're a coach or if you're someone who really wants to research some of the accommodations for ADHD. You can go to, I think it's askjan.org. I have it somewhere in my notes. But that's where, they explain, how do you get the accommodation? How do you apply for it? What are the accommodations that might be appropriate. So they have accommodations for being distracted, for attentiveness, for a variety of things. And so then we go through that together and we talk about what are your challenges, and so what are some of the accommodations that would work for you, and then they jot it down. So it's kind of like they're prepared, they're well rehearsed, and they pretty much know, they know a little something about, what to ask in terms of accommodations. So both ways.
So I think a lot of your success in your career hinges on either having diagnosis or being able to pretty well pin down that you at least are exhibiting several symptoms of ADHD, becoming very familiar with the executive functioning challenges that you have, and being your own biggest advocate for uncovering what your rights are, B, what accommodations are available, and maybe even practicing or working with an ADHD career coach like yourself to rehearse and go over how you might have those somewhat potentially difficult conversations. But I want to stop for just a moment. For those of you who are listening in or maybe have just joined, I popped a poll up. So I would appreciate if you would take the poll. I'm going to pause just for a moment to share the results so far out of those who have participated. And obviously oh my gosh, anonymously. It's Friday, folks, and my poor little ADHD brain is tired. So one of the questions was, I asked if you have or suspect you have ADHD. 67% of our attendees do. And I also asked if you manage or provide leadership to a neurodivergent employee or team members. 67% responded yes. And the areas that people find most challenging, and this can inform some of the rest of our conversation, Victoria, is the biggest challenges people have in their career due to their ADHD is, number one, concentration on tasks, followed by meeting deadlines, followed by organizational skills, and lastly, communication with colleagues. And then strategies that everyone wants to learn about, pretty much even across the board, including some time management tools, organizational techniques, and we can also talk about some other strategies that people can leverage. So if you haven't taken that poll, please do. We'd love to have your participation. And I think what's really startling here, obviously this is a talk about ADHD, so I'm assuming that a lot of people who joined are joining because they have it or suspect they have it. But I started reading this book, and you and I were talking about this the other day, ADHD for Smart Ass Women. I started reading this, Victoria. I'm 45 pages in, which is a record for me reading a book in a long time to sit and actually read something that much and that straight through. But there were a couple things that have really hit me so far. And one of them, I actually earmarked it. Let's see if I can find it. One of them is that people with ADHD are extremely underdiagnosed. In fact, as many as 75% of girls with ADHD go undiagnosed. Undiagnosed, 75%. And then I was also reading, let's see if I can find the statistic. I may not be able to find it fast enough, and that's okay. But it was basically about how, so in terms of men versus women being diagnosed, now we already said 75% of all girls with ADHD remain undiagnosed. While ADHD is just as likely to occur in either sex, 5.4% of American men have received an ADHD diagnosis, while only 3.2% of women have received one. So there's a much higher incidence of men getting those diagnoses. But the other piece to know here is that both sexes, men and women, are severely undiagnosed. This is not a condition that is not widely recognized necessarily by all physicians, which to me in 2024 is literally mind-boggling. That there are physicians out there that have not accepted that this is an actual condition, yet all of the major health organizations in the United States have all agreed and put out research and studies that says, yes, ADHD, in fact, is an actual condition. It impacts women and men. and it is severely undiagnosed. And I'm also learning that there are few resources. And that is one of the reasons, for those of you who are listening in, one of the reasons that I wanted to bring Victoria on today is because there are so few resources. And a lot of people, as you can imagine, because healthcare is not the greatest in this country, don't have resources or healthcare coverage that can help get some of these resources. So there are alternatives such as ADHD career coaches like Victoria who can help. There are now books on the market. There are some more resources that are emerging to help you. But that's why I was so passionate about bringing you on, is because I want people to know there are people that can help you, that understand, that believe you, and that want to see you successful in spite of having ADHD, and even being successful because of having ADHD. And we can talk a little bit about that. And that's actually maybe a good place to go next, is what are some things or symptoms of ADHD that can actually make you successful? What can you harness the power of that could actually help it propel you in your career, such as maybe hyper focusing? That's the first thing that comes to mind, but maybe you have some ideas.
If you're hyper focusing, then you can get a lot of work done.
Explain what that is for everyone.
Hyper focusing,
familiar.
Hyper focusing is focusing for a long period of time on your work, and there are benefits to that, but there are also drawbacks to that. The benefits are that you can get a lot of work done, with the hyper focus. The drawbacks of that are the brain can only be efficient for short periods of time. So if you are working for 3-4 hours at a time without a break, it's exhausting. It could be exhausting. So part of one of the recommendations that I usually make to people who are hyper focusing and it's becoming a disadvantage is to just take breaks. Like put a reminder on your phone that, after an hour, just take a break, get up, even if it's a 5-minute break. We call them micro breaks. And to do that. So those are the advantages and disadvantages. Then for people who are, really, well, let's say hyperactive. So the combination of hyperactive as well as being an extrovert where you have a lot of energy, people can be, in high level management positions. They're speakers. They might be good debaters. I'm working with somebody who fits that right now, and he's looking for a different career. And he loves to debate, and he's really good, he's really good at speaking, and he's really good at writing. And so that could be a real benefit, to people. Also, brainstorming. A lot of ADHDers are really, really creative.
Yes.
Like they can go into a conference room, get in there and really rock the room with how they think, because they're really good at creative brainstorming. So those are just a couple of the things that I would say.
Well, that's really great. And I was always the type of person, and it probably annoyed some people, but I was always the one who, they're like, when the teacher or my boss would be like, all right, who wants to stand up at the whiteboard and do the writing? I'm like, me. I'm like, any opportunity that I had to get out of my chair and do something active, if it was standing, was helpful for me. And then the other thing is, and I noticed this particularly when I started working remotely and became a business owner, is I would get into these hyper focus modes on unfortunately too rare of occasions. Most of the time I was distractible, but I would get so focused and into what I was doing that this is silly, but I wouldn't even get up to go to the bathroom, or I'd run out of water, and I would be super thirsty, but I'd be like so entrenched in what I was doing that I wouldn't even get up. So one of the things I did, and this isn't for everyone, obviously, but I ended up adopting a dog, in part just to make me get up from my desk, because a calendar reminder, while I live and die by my calendar, sometimes wasn't enough. I needed a physical being to remind me, hey, you need to get up, take a walk, rest your brain. because I was experiencing overwhelm and burnout, which are two characteristics or symptoms that I hear a lot of people with ADHD struggle with. So while getting a dog may not be for everyone, I think to your point, you must make notes for yourself and force yourself to take breaks for your brain. Even if you think you can keep going, our brains, what do they say? Every 50 minutes to an hour, we should be taking at least a 5-minute break or something like
Yeah,
that.
at least.
Yeah.
And that varies from person to person, but I would say at least, every hour. For some people, it's every half hour.
Yeah.
But yeah, for every hour, just get up. If you work from home, throw some laundry in, get a snack, go for a walk, do something where, and it's energizing as well.
Yes. I used to take walks when I worked in a corporate office, and that made a big difference. Depending on where you work, mine was a little bit of a micromanager. So sometimes I'd have to be like, well, I'm going on a walk, because people would ask why I wasn't at my desk. And I'm like, goodness gracious, like you have to be chained to your desk. One of the best things that ever happened to me professionally was actually becoming, first of all, was working remote, even when I was still in a corporate job. It allowed me to make my schedule. I had a very understanding manager who knew that I needed to take breaks, who knew I couldn't be productive at certain hours, so that I would either work earlier in the morning or in the evening. I might work from 10 to midnight, but I would take a couple-hour break in the middle of the day to do laundry, go to my kids' school and volunteer, whatever it was. The second thing that worked really well for me, and it may not work for a lot of people, but I found it to be helpful, was actually becoming an entrepreneur. Something I never ever saw for myself as being a possibility. But once I became a business owner and continued to operate remotely out of my own home, where I could do a load of laundry, or I could go take a quick walk with my dog, or I could run to my kids' school 5 minutes down the road. Those things allowed me to accommodate the symptoms I was experiencing in a way that felt authentic for me, and that worked really well. And while that's not for everyone, I think what I want you to take from this talk is take all of these suggestions and ideas and figure out what works for you. Trial and error. It's the only way you're going to figure it out. With that, let me ask you another question. What are some of your strategies? And you gave us a couple, so let's see if there's anything else you would add. What are strategies for managing distractibility in the office? Do you have any other suggestions outside of those that you mentioned? And maybe it is asking for accommodations to work part-time from home or something. I don't know.
Yeah. So, distraction. So what I suggest to people is, let's say you're in a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to stay on task, because being in a meeting, sometimes it's 45 minutes long, and you want to be able to pay attention to what's going on.
Yeah.
And I suggest that people have something in their hand. They have a pen, and they have a notebook. And even if they don't want to take notes, so I would say take notes.
Yeah.
I would say do mind mapping. I would say do some doodling, or do something to keep yourself on track. So, that's something else. Let's see, what else for distraction? I would say that so some people like to use the Pomodoro method, which is, you're gonna turn off the distractions, turn off your phone, turn off your computer, go on focused mode, and then start working. And so you put a timer on for maybe 35 minutes or so, and you are focused on that without any distractions. And so, that's something else, because I think that in terms of productivity, sometimes it's good to have short periods of time where you're actually getting things done.
Yeah.
So and also, when I'm working with clients that have lots of different projects that are going on, to actually time block some of those projects into the schedule. They will say, okay, you've got a half hour or an hour there. Let's time block that in. But I want to say something else, in terms of that. So when we're working, typically with almost every single one of my clients, we're working on, how do you plan out your day? So you come up with your top 3 priorities. I ask them, what are your top 3 priorities that absolutely positively need to get done by the end of the day, whether it's finishing or working on, and they come up with that. As we're doing the schedule, it's so easy to try to fill every single hour in, but it's not great. So I think that, so as I'm working with clients that, really need help in managing their daily schedule, is to consider taking those micro breaks in, like in the schedule, so that, because if your schedule is full from, 9 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it's so easy to be exhausted.
Yeah.
So time for micro breaks, time for eating, time, time for emails. Emails is another one too, is putting time, because I don't know about you, but I am a victim of this as well. I'll go a whole day without even reading my emails because I'm so busy working on something else. I don't know if you experience that, but, so I do. And so I have to remind myself, okay, I have to read my emails like at least twice a day. And so sometimes I will put it into I'll put it into the schedule, like 10 minutes.
So I'm actually opposite. I see my email inbox ding and I'm like, immediately drop what I'm doing and I look at it. I probably won't respond. And in fact, I'll probably forget to respond until the next day. But I'm so easily distracted and I keep 18 tabs open at all time that I fall into that. One thing I would add is, one thing I have trouble with is just getting started. If there are tasks I don't like and I don't want to do, adulting, career, personal, whatever it is, and there are lots of them, I will find any and every reason not to start. So one deal I make with myself that might work for other folks is I say, okay, I will commit 5 or 10 minutes to doing this activity. 5 or 10 minutes. Maybe it's responding to emails. I'm like, whatever I can get done in 10 minutes is what I get done. And I often find that once I get 10 minutes into an activity, that my brain has decided to cooperate with me and I can stick with it. And if I can't, I will say, okay, I give myself a break. I'm like, all right, Kate, it's not going to happen right now. I put another 10 minutes on my calendar for later in the day to go back to it whenever I can and start over. But sometimes if I make a small commitment, I find that I can continue on. So I don't know if that works for other people. But that's one of my hardest things. And I think you and I were talking, this happens every month. I have to fill my Adderall prescription. Is I am so overwhelmed by having to make phone calls, such as customer service, making a doctor's appointment. I will go months without making a phone call, even if it only will take 5 minutes. And I do this with my prescription. I'm so anxious about having to talk to a human being about something that I am entitled to and need, that I wait until the day I'm out of medication or I'm already out for a couple of days, and then I'm frantically calling my doctor, crying and being like, oh my gosh, I need you to help me. So I'm really grateful for the suggestions you're giving about trying to get ahead of some of these things, allocating time, making sure that tasks get done, but also prioritizing what are the top things that absolutely need to happen. And we actually had someone comment in the Q&A that they love the Pomodoro technique and that it could really be crucial to taking some of those short breaks like you mentioned. And for those of you who are listening in, this is a great opportunity. Please use the Q&A feature. We are happy to address your questions. I will not out you. You can remain anonymous, but we want to hear from you. So feel free to ask questions, answer the poll if you haven't already. And all right, we can move on from there. So we talked a little bit about managing time, taking breaks. What about people who struggle with work-life balance and burnout. We sort of started to touch on that. What are your suggestions for managing burnout or just keeping balance in their life and career so that they can remain productive and engaged?
So, for burnout, I just want to distinguish the difference between, having a bad day and experiencing burnout. And so burnout is actually defined as emotional exhaustion resulting from prolonged stress. So some of the symptoms are, exhaustion, inability to focus, mind wandering. It's just like you can't get it together, like reduced motivation, not being able. So I have a client who is in this space of exhaustion right now, of burnout. And he's saying, I just can't do anything. Like all the habits that you and I have been working on, they've dropped because all I'm doing is I'm going to work, I'm stressed out, I'm working all day. I get home and I just collapse when I get home. I have dinner and I go to bed.
Yeah.
And so that's the difference. It's like people who are, there's like prolonged stress and it's over, could be several weeks. I just started working with someone who's been chronically burned out for years. Yeah. And that's really difficult. So, so part of what we do is, to reduce some of the burnout is we talk about it. We talk about like, what are some of the symptoms that you're experiencing? So I would say to encourage people to talk to, whether it be a coach or a therapist. And if you don't have a coach or a therapist that's available, tap into your network, someone who respects you, you have mutual respect for somebody, would be also, really helpful. And then, some of the things that lead to burnout, I think are key points that we should consider. And that is, overcommitment. So a lot of my clients say yes to everything that their boss wants them to do. And their boss, when the boss keeps on piling things on more and more and more, and they continue to say yes, they get to the point where they're so overwhelmed that they can't complete the tasks well enough. Yeah. So what we work on is boundaries. We work on boundaries. So, discussing with your boss, how much work you have, and, and dialoguing about, you don't have to call it burnout, but certainly dialoguing about how much work you are able to accomplish, and can we, can we delegate that to somebody else, or I can't take on too many other things right now because I'm really overtaxed. Or being in your head, like, over analyzing, being a workaholic, and just, like working. A lot of people feel as though they have to work and work and work, for several hours a day, even like maybe hours over and above what they need to work. Yeah. Because they're trying to do as good a job as they possibly can, but they're exhausting themselves. They may be doing, more than they need to. Yeah. And then people pleasing. Some people who are people pleasers, who want to always do the right thing. They want to always please their boss. People pleasing. There are benefits to people. There are always benefits to people pleasing because everybody loves you. Yeah. But what happens with people who are people pleasers is that they come last. Yeah. And so some of the things that I think really helps, are self-care. Self-care. So we go over, okay, so this is what's happening to you, let's talk about it. And then we talk, okay, so what are some other things in your life? And it's really a brainstorming session. What are some of the other things in your life you can do, when you get home? So, maybe there's a meditation practice that we could get them started with. Or it might be something as simple as, when you get home from work, go walk your dog. I mean, that sounds so simple, but when you are exhausted,
Yeah.
those simple things, just taking those simple steps, can be really, really helpful to people.
Well, I've noticed two things that make a big impact for me in reducing the symptoms or the severity of my symptoms are exercise on a regular basis, whether that's walking my dog. For me, I'm a dancer. I do salsa and bachata 5-6 days a week. That satisfies that hyperactivity piece that I struggle with, the social aspect, as well as just moving my body and reducing stress. And the other thing which I struggle with based on my hyperfixation of foods is when I eat clean, meaning reduce junk food or eliminate processed foods, I feel physically and mentally more clear and better. We have a couple of questions that I would love for you to answer. And so one of our listeners asked, where's the best place to start if you suspect you have the hallmarks of ADHD, but you have not been diagnosed? This person has heard that there are online tests that can be done to get a basic readout. Is this a useful first step? Or, and I know this is a multi-part question, so we can break it down if you need to. Or in your experience, do primary care physicians typically know how to diagnose, or is there a better resource for getting a diagnosis if you suspect you have ADHD?
Okay. So primary care physicians oftentimes are not trained in working with people with ADHD. They can dispense medications. So if you do get diagnosed and you're working with somebody and maybe that person, the psychiatrist, is too expensive, you can certainly work with your primary. So there's a way to actually work with the primary. But in order to get a diagnosis, so one is, if you want to learn about how to get a diagnosis, you could go to the CHAD site. It's www.chad.org, and it's Children and Adults with Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. I like that site because and with that, there's a help for ADHD. It's all connected on the website. And what that does is it gives you fact sheets. You go to the fact sheets and it'll tell you what's the definition of ADHD. How do you get a diagnosis? So if you want some background work, you could do that. The people who, lately, what I do is my go-to place when I'm trying to find whether it be a psychiatrist or a nurse practitioner is to go to Psychology Today. Psychology Today has a list of resources. They have pictures, they have bios, some people do videos, and I will, I'll suggest that. And you look at the people who are in the industry, usually they'll say in their bio, I work with ADHD. And so I would say, that's another recommendation. And I noticed, because of the fact that there aren't enough psychiatrists in the United States right now. So there are nurse practitioners, thank goodness, whether there's nurse practitioners or psychiatric nurses that are actually diagnosing and prescribing. So it's great. It really is great.
Yeah, my diagnosis came from a psychiatrist because I was already seeing one for depression, anxiety, which from what I've read, also for there's an incident where people who have ADHD oftentimes also suffer from another type of mental health disorder, such as anxiety, depression, OCD, and similar conditions, or bipolar, and are oftentimes misdiagnosed as a mood disorder instead of ADHD. Particularly this happens with women. So I think to mirror what you've shared is, based on my personal experience and your expertise, I think that going to a psychiatrist or a nurse practitioner is probably going to be your best bet for an accurate reading. And I think for someone who's going to be more knowledgeable, particularly on the types of medications you should be taking, and I've known this from being on meds for decades, is that when you see a psychiatrist, they're going to know more about the different medications out there than a general practitioner who has limited time and is addressing all the body concerns and just the brain. We have another question for you, Victoria. So, okay, this is what the person has to say. This person and their career coach clients struggle to talk with their manager about how much they can do and when to say no, because A, they don't necessarily do a good job estimating how much time a task will take. Ooh, that's a good point. B, they feel guilty because they already feel like they're taking too long to complete the task. So are there any tips on knowing whether they deserve to say no? I'm going to chime in and say you always deserve to say no, but I'd love to hear from Victoria. When people are struggling with guilt or feeling bad about taking longer to maybe do tasks that other people may take less time to do, what would you say to those folks?
Well, I think that I agree with you. I think they have the right to, I mean, you can't say no to your boss, but you can certainly get into a conversation with your boss saying, I mean, I think a lot of this is communication. It's like, okay, I've got 15 projects and you just gave me 3, I mean, I wouldn't say it this way, but I've got all of these projects. And right now I'm really, I really want to meet my deadlines, and I know I can meet my deadlines if I don't have any competing projects. So it's getting into a dialogue. So it's getting into the dialogue about that. Yeah. And the second thing is that if they need help with deadlines and working on projects and making sure that they are moving along, to having regular check-ins on particular projects, about that, which is really helpful.
Agree. I love that. Now we have a few minutes and we're happy to, I can stay a few minutes after the top of the hour to answer any questions. I don't know if Victoria is available. So drop your questions in the comments, but I want to give Victoria an opportunity to share a couple additional resources that those of you listening might really benefit from. And in fact, I asked her for the link because I wanted to share it with someone close to me as being very beneficial. Will you share with our listeners a couple of the resources and events that you have going on? And we can drop them in the chat too. I think you sent me the links. Go ahead and share what you going on, because I think it'd be really helpful for people.
Well, the number one resource that I think is really great for people that is free, that you can learn about ADHD, is Attitude Magazine. Yes. And that is a fantastic place, and the resources are great. I think, and they're short articles, they're to the point, and that's additudmag.com. Yeah, that's one. I would say that's really great. Chad is also another if you're new and want information. Wilma Feldman's book, which is what I use when I work with neurodivergent clients, and it's called Finding a Career That Works for You, a step-by-step guide to choosing a career and finding a job. That's Wilma Feldman. Let's see, for accommodations and workplace. So if you're a coach and you want, or if you're someone who wants to read something about workplace and managing your ADHD in the workplace, a great resource is Kathleen Nadau's book, and it's called The ADHD Guide to Career Success. I love that one, and I love so many things about it, but what I do love about it is she gives you, you take a questionnaire, and sometimes I do this with my clients. You take a career, you identify what kinds of issues you're having in the workplace, and then the book actually gives you accommodations for each of the areas that you are having a difficult time with. So I really like that.
I'm just dropping these in the chat as you talk, so that's why I keep looking up. I'm putting these in here for everyone in the chat, and I'll also make sure they go out in an email. I'll send the recording of this out with some additional resources, and I'm adding in a book. Go ahead. What's your events?
Oh, yes, events. Okay. So I have two events that are actually coming up at the center. And one is I call it, discover your, let's see, discover your next move, basically moving on. Okay, here it is. Discover your career fit, mapping out your next step in your career. So what it is it's for people who are at a place where they're either unhappy with their job and thinking about some options, or they're not working, and just like people just want to begin to think about, what's next for me. I love this workshop that I do. I do this as a part of my coaching when I do one-to-one, but I also do it as a workshop. It's basically a 6-week, we meet 1 hour a week, and we work on, and so it's 1 hour, it's starting on the 23rd. You can put the link in, if I can give you the link and you can maybe send it out.
Okay.
So basically what we do is we work on, the pillars. So we work on, what job, what aligns the 4 pillars. It's kind of like, we want to do skills assessments. Number 1, you want to make sure that the next job that you get or career is aligned with your skills. We also work on strengths, a variety of tools that I use for strengths. We work on executive functioning, is part of it. We also work on personality. What's your personal style and what are the strengths from that? The big one is working on your values. Both, it's kind of like, because when you're doing career coaching, Kate, right? It's like if people are transitioning to something else, you have to think about the lifestyle. Yep. So it's kind of like, like, what kind of a lifestyle do you want? That's the values piece. And also, what are some of the most important things that you want in your next job? And so over the weeks, what we do is I give everybody, we talk about, these pillars, and then I give them assignments to do. So every week when, they are coming in and they're actually summarizing, and I'm asking them to prioritize. By the end of the 6 weeks, they come up with a career profile. Mm-hmm. And it's all that prioritized work on, like, it could be one to 2 pages. And they can use that for job interviews. They can use that for informational interviews. I mean, it really gives the people a sense of, like, who am I? What are my strengths? What are my skills? What do I do best? And also, and I'm sure you do this, Kate. It's like kind of like when you're in interviews, mm-hmm. I empower my clients to, like, now that you know this about yourself, you've got to interview them. Yes. You've got to come up with it. You have to make sure that that job is right for you. So yeah. I love this, the career fit work. And I want to give accolades to the woman, to the book that I got this information from. And just because it's called UMAP. Kristen Sherry wrote this book, and it's called UMAP, a step-by-step guide to discovering and landing the job that you love. I got the idea about doing this workshop from Chris, and I actually do it through the lens of ADHD. But a lot of the tools are the tools from that book. And I think that's also another great resource.
I love it. This has been extraordinarily helpful. I've been dropping in links to all of these books, to the Attitude magazine, and as well as the workshop or the 6-week course that you've got. And we will include, I will wrap up by sending everyone that registered and attended this event today will get the recording link so you can review. I will also include a list of the resources that we talked about today so you can reference those. Is there anything else you want to add before I introduce next month's topic and guest?
Well, the only thing I want people to have is, maybe you could just put it in the notes when you send it out. I just want people to have my contact information.
Yes.
So they can go to, let's see, I have a couple of emails, but I guess the easiest one is Victoria at the Center for Living Well with ADHD.org. That's a long one, but that's one email, and that's the center email. You got that? It's
Is
a
it
long.
Victoria at Center for Living Well with ADHD.org?
That's it. You got it.
All right, got it in the chat. Perfect.
So yeah, so if anybody wants to contact me directly, you can certainly do that if you have any questions or you need any resources. I have lots more resources, but I just didn't get into it.
I love it. Thank you so much. Victoria, it has been a pleasure. This is one of the most enjoyable conversations I've had, very informative and very insightful. I know that the people that have listened in today and that will be watching the recording are going to have a lot of takeaways as well as resources they can tap into to take advantage of the ADHD symptoms they have and turn them into positives. Now, I'm super excited because in June, Spilling the Tea for Career Success is going to feature special guest Karen Bigman, who is a certified menopause coach and also helps individuals explore midlife sexuality. And before you run away, I want you to think about joining this talk because we are going to be having a very candid conversation about women's mid-health challenges and career resilience. If you are in your 30s through your 60s and a woman, and even if you're a man and you have women on your team, you should be joining this because we're going to be talking about the impacts of perimenopause, menopause, and other female midlife health challenges and issues that all of us have to deal with and how you can overcome some of these challenges in the workplace and to advance successfully in your career. That's going to be taking place on Thursday, June 6th at 12 p.m. Eastern. I already have the event link up. I am going to go ahead and throw it in the chat. If you want to register right now, I would urge you to do it. It's going to be a fantastic conversation. Victoria, oh, we have one last question. It looks like, oh, fabulous and insightful conversation. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who joined in this afternoon. Really enjoyed having you and your questions and insightful thoughts. Victoria, a big thank you and hug from South Florida for joining me as my special.
Oh, this was great. It was fun. And so I hope that people learned something and it's something that you can share with others.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate everything that you shared with us today. And everyone that's listening in, have a superb weekend. And I look forward to seeing you next month for Spilling the Tea for Career Success. Cheers.
Thank you, Kate.